Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Galina Gheihman. Welcome to Meet the Author, the podcast where we dive beyond the pages of neurology education to uncover the stories and insights behind the research shaping how we teach neurology. Today, we're exploring what medical students really value in neurology residents as teachers and how this can guide resident as teacher programs. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Harry Sutherland, one of the authors of the study we'll be talking about today. Harry is a second-year epilepsy fellow in the Department of Neurology at Yale New Haven Hospital. His research focuses on improving how residents teach medical students. Today, we're going to explore what makes a resident teacher truly stand out from the medical student perspective. So let's dive in. Hi, Harry.
Hi, Galina. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to join you and always happy to talk about medical education.
So this article was called What Medical Students Value in Neurology Residents, a Qualitative Study to Inform Resident as Teacher Curricula. And it was by yourself and Jeremy Moeller and Sara Schaefer from Yale School of Medicine. In the study, you analyzed 200 student evaluations of neurology residents over 9 years, and you uncovered 6 key themes and 27 subthemes that define what makes a resident an effective teacher, from involving students in patient care to providing feedback and creating a safe learning environment. I think the key takeaway for me was that great teaching is more than just about delivering knowledge. It's actually about role modeling, mentorship, and shaping the learning experience. So one thing I wanted to start with was just asking, what inspired you to pursue this study?
A good question. It actually wasn't my study idea. It was actually Dr. Schaefer's. But I love the idea because I, as a resident, felt like I wasn't teaching my medical students as much as I wished that I were, because I thought of myself as obviously a clinical resident, but also as a teacher. And I really wished I had more time to sit aside, make a chalk talk, go through some slides with my students. And I felt like I wasn't doing that as much as I wanted to. And I heard some similar sentiments echoed by my co-residents who felt like they weren't teaching enough. And so it was an interesting opportunity to get to dive into the evaluation comments that students write about their residents and see what things they like and a couple things that they don't like about what their residents do that helps facilitate their educational environment when they're on the clerkships.
So it sounded like you had this one conception of how you teach as a resident, but you found something a little bit different. You found that students highly value being involved in patient care, getting feedback, and this element of, an environment that's psychologically safe where they can be challenged to grow, but be supported as well. Were the findings surprising to you?
To me, initially, yeah. I definitely thought that the sine qua non of teaching was pulling out a magic marker and going to a whiteboard, but that's an important element of teaching, and if you have time to do it, the students definitely appreciate it, but it's only a small portion of the total educational content that the students get from their clerkship. You mentioned work-based learning, so they learn just from taking care of patients. So if you select good teaching cases for them to be a part of, they learn from helping direct the care for their patients, so you can get them to actually commit to a firmer assessment and plan or call a consult or update families. They learn just from your example. So you're role modeling and you're teaching by your example, even when you're not fully conscious of it. And there's all kinds of teaching that perhaps the teacher is not fully conscious of. And so I think that I was only aware of a small sliver of the teaching that I was doing. And I now have a much broader consciousness of the teaching that I'm doing, both by teaching, by involving my medical students, by pushing them to get more involved and challenging their baseline understandings, but also just by doing my work and showing them how I'm doing my work.
I'd love to dive into that a little bit deeper, Harry. Can you give us an example of how you've changed your teaching approach as a result of this study?
Well, there is this concept from feedback about signposting. It recognizes that a lot of learners may have difficulty fully realizing that they are getting feedback in the moment if it's not summative, end of rotation feedback. And so I've incorporated some more of that into my work-based teaching. So if we're going over images or we're going over how to interpret an EEG result, I will be a little bit more explicit about this is a good teaching point. For this patient, we're seeing LPDs, and LPDs tell us that this part of the cortex is not just highly irritable, but this is lying along the IIC. And so you can have a brief little mini script for what IIC means if you had the time to tack that on. But just the explicit mention of, this is a good teaching point of these are LPDs, I think helps anchor that learning point from the work so they realize it as learning and teaching.
I guess in a way you're getting at this idea that perhaps residents have an idea of what teaching is, and maybe students also have an idea. And so if we can have a better explicit understanding about what's feedback, what's teaching, what's clinical care, and just sort of helping them navigate those distinctions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing you point out is the fact that you weren't aware of this as a resident, that this study helped bring this to your consciousness. And I'm wondering, if perhaps you weren't the only one who's not aware as a resident. How do you think some of these insights might reshape how we actually train neurology residents to teach? Should we be including them in curricula? Should we be raising the consciousness of these elements? What do you think our next steps are?
It's a good question. There are a lot of curricula out there, and I looked through some for the literature review for this project, and there are a lot of different versions of what a resident as educator training program looks like. So at our institution, we had one that was mostly based around the 1-minute preceptor. And so it's kind of recognition of the different steps of a 1-minute preceptor, which is a fabulous model to use if you can incorporate it, do. But there are other programs that have more elements to it. The AAN now has the Neurology Educator Training Program, which has an all-star cast of educators from around the country. So if you're an interested resident, check it out. Dr. Stimming is the lead of that, but it's a great program for educators who want to learn how to get better at teaching, but also be introduced to educational scholarship. And the hope is that the findings of this can help better inform what skills residents need, because a lot of programs from the past, from across institutions, have focused on maybe 1-minute preceptor or different feedback models. And those are excellent skills to develop for resident teachers, but there are maybe some other skills that we've been overlooking in the past. So skills about how to get students more involved. So maybe you can mock up how to have that first day on the clerkship talk to orient your students to the rotation and the goals and expectations of that rotation. Or you can help coach them through their presentation for attending rounds before rounds. Or you can help them better understand how to call a consult and make it a good encounter for them. And different ways of making sure that you're giving the medical students ways to get involved and push themselves to derive the maximal possible learning from the clinical environment.
That sounds great. It's really a way of kind of parsing out the tasks that we do in the day and thinking about which morsels can we pass on to our students. We actually reviewed your article in one of our journal clubs for our medical education interested residents, and it was a great discussion. One of the residents actually, just like you, was really kind of relieved to hear that some of the role modeling that they were able to do would be an educational opportunity. And another one said something which I think was really insightful. They shared that, education with like a capital E or teaching with a capital T seems like this global sort of persona, like you have it or you don't. But this article really helped to break down some of the concrete steps almost anyone could take that can help to create more of that educational alliance with the students.
Yeah, there are competencies to being an educator. And some people are very confident in some domains, and some people are not as confident in other domains, and we're all always growing.
One of the themes that you talked about as well was the attitude of the resident teacher. So they were approachable, they were excited to teach, they were looking for that opportunity to bring some enthusiasm to the day, they made time to teach. But we also know residents are under immense clinical pressure. They're really the workhorses on the wards, they're the ones running around doing the consults and the acute stroke alerts. So what can residency programs kind of at a more systematic level do to support residents to balance teaching and patient care?
I think that this is such an important point, because the busyness of a resident is why it matters that they're good teachers, because the residents are doing so much of the work on the floor or in the ED or in the ICU that the medical students are tagging along from. So they're learning a lot from the residents. The attending plays a huge role in the education of the medical student, but they spend much more time with the resident. So the more that the resident is capable of giving a good educational exposure, the better the rotation experience is going to be for the medical student. So as far as how to make residents be the kind of enthusiastic, empathic people they can be, obviously burnout is something to address as much as possible. I am not an expert in burnout, so I don't know what factors are particularly helpful to try to target when it comes to burnout. But I think that residents who are able to care for themselves are probably able to care for medical students even more, to look out for what are the medical students' goals? Can I carve out enough time to give them effective feedback versus get home and make my own dinner? And so I think that if the resident feels psychologically safe and that they have time, they can probably pass some of that along to the medical student, because psychological safety and feeling like they're a worthwhile member of the team are so important to the student, versus an experience where they feel like they're just in the way or they're not even there at all.
I'm really glad that you shared some opportunities for improvement, and really touching on burnout, I think, is key as well. Really, this idea that we want to support our residents and kind of bring to light the many ways that both students can bring value to the team, and then also residents can bring value as educators to the students that they're working with. I'm also struck by this idea that, we as faculty, you mentioned maybe not having as much of a role or at least as much time with the medical students, but we do have an opportunity to mentor the residents. So for all those kind of educator or attending faculty out there who are going to be supervising the residents, what's one thing that you think they could be doing differently, even as soon as tomorrow, to help foster some of these qualities in their resident educators, or at least support them?
I think role modeling. I think that if you're an attending and you care passionately about these things, but don't have the time to pull a resident aside and give them a one-on-one session on how to make sure that you're getting your medical student involved in clinical care, you can role model how to get that student involved. So you can have the medical student lead the physical exam in the room rather than having the resident or yourself lead. And then just by the power of your example, some of the residents may also pick up on that and the interns may pick up on that, so that when they go and pre-run with the medical student, now the medical student is leading the history gathering process and leading the physical exam and making it a much more active, interactive session so that they can get a little bit more out of that experience.
So in some ways, maybe bringing it back to the data, we're maybe generalizing a little outside of what you studied, but it sounds like some of these concepts might also be relevant to the faculty educators who are worried about what impact they might be having on the residents, the medical students themselves in a busy clinical setting.
It stands to reason, but hey, it might be a worthwhile study in the future.
Well, you heard it here first. Future investigations still needed. But Harry, thanks so much for that wonderful and insightful conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. I wanted to sum up a little bit of the key takeaways that the study shows. So it's reminding us that students really value not just content knowledge, but also the environment and the team approach that residents can create. Some takeaways for neurology educators. The first is that engagement really matters. Students and residents want to feel involved in patient care, not just observing it. Feedback is essential, and that feedback is really about helping students improve in real time. So using that signposting to give feedback immediately in the setting when they say something or share something or take a stab at making a conclusion. Approachability and psychological safety is key, and more work needs to be done to understand the relationship between that and burnout, and resilience and what we can do to support our residents. And my favorite takeaway is really that teaching happens everywhere, all the time, at the bedside, during rounds, even in the clinical workflow itself, not just in planned teaching moments when we step aside. And we have really an opportunity to make our workplaces ones where we're supporting a learning environment as well. Harry, anything else that you think we should take away from this article?
Neurology Education is a fantastic journal, and you should all read it every day.
Love that endorsement. Thank you. And I think the only other thing I'd add is if you're an educator designing a resident teacher curriculum, check out this study because it offers you some really practical, learner-centered approaches to work on and potentially kind of shift what you're teaching to what students really want in the clinical setting. Well, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in to Meet the Author. And thanks again, Harry, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been such a pleasure joining you today.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with your colleagues and stay tuned for more behind-the-scenes conversations on the latest in neurology education. I've been your host, Dr. Galina Gheihman, for the Meet the Author podcast. See you next time.